what it's worth, I'm proud of you boys.
Joel and George are pretty old school names. It's not like a new name.
Joel.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to say that this movie does feel, I really appreciated it, that it felt like wholesome and old school, like we're saying. Talk about your motive on that.
Well, we wanted to tell, I mean, I love the book, right? And we felt like it was a really exciting story to talk about how these guys had to get together and they had to work together. And, you know, I've done a lot of cynical films in my life, including Batman and Robin, which was a classic. You know, I just felt like this is a different version of this is a story that's about that made me. It's a Christmas film, you know what I mean? And not that it has anything to do with Christmas, but it has a feeling of like people sitting around that, you know, around Christmas Day, going out and watching a film.
Well, it had faith, and it had like coming from nothing to you know, getting somewhere. And so, can both of you kind of talk about, you know, that theme of like being the underdog and
I have a big theory that we all think we deep down think we're underdogs. You know, everything we face in life, in work and relationships and finance, and that we're all facing a looming obstacle, and that we're not worthy. And I think that's why we love an underdog story.
Evie doesn't feel like she's an underdog. She knows she's got this. She's got it together.
That's
it's
true.
You.
I meant to say all of us, but Evie.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, I think we're all walking around thinking everybody's going to find out we're not good enough. And so I think we love getting our spirit and our energy and our enthusiasm and goodwill behind people who don't look like they're going to win.
Yeah.
To sort of like put a sort of spiritual, you know, hand on their back.
Yeah. You were a great coach in the movie. Did you have someone in your life, both of you, that kind of helped coach you and get you to where you were today?
My dad's my best coach. I mean, but every coach I've ever met is some version of Ulbrichtson, is that person you really want to please. And the biggest person, apart from George and you, that I want to please in my life is my dad. Sure. And he's not expecting the worst from me, but I'm projecting onto him. And I think that's sort of what coaches... they fill that gap, you know.
I think sons have that with their fathers a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly have it with my father as well, which is always, you know, just a pat on the back is a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, from your dad. And that's kind of what he was
A wink
playing.
from across the room is worth an essay of words from your mother. And it's like, I feel sorry for mothers because it's so open-hearted. But then a dad's just like, and you're like, oh, thanks, Dad.
I understand that. I have my baby here, actually. He should have done the interview.
He should have.
That would have
I
been
thought it
pretty
was
great.
so sweet how you portrayed a relationship. And it was so, you know, like I said, wholesome. It's just sweet. And so what was kind of the motive there to...
Well, also, you have to remember, even though it's the boys in the boat, and the rowing was important, we had to make rowing interesting and fun and exciting. It is, but showing it in the cinemas, it has to look that way. But what was really important is you had to care about the characters. That's it. And these guys are really lovable. And the love story, you know, in real life, they were married for 65 years or something insane like that. So it's a beautiful story. And they were just classic sort of old-fashioned sports films that I loved. I loved growing up watching Hoosiers and The Natural and films like that.
So one thing I loved about this movie, it was so sweet and kind of wholesome. What were the elements that you guys were like, I love this script, I want to be on board with it, and kind of the story behind it?
It is so sweet and wholesome, and I think I was drawn to that as well because you don't see many stories like that feel triumphant in that way and and victorious in that way anymore. And we really lean into it, and it's palpable. You know, you can feel it as an audience member, and I wanted to be a part of, you know, spreading that kind of light. And their relationship is definitely like something to look up to, and the way like he works with his teammates and et cetera, et cetera.
And also the director, you know. He's an up-and-coming actor, but he's directing some movies too. If he wanted to do a movie about going to Mars, I would have done it. It just so happened to be that it was a sports movie, and I've always wanted to do a sports movie. I was 31 when I got the part, and so I was running out of time, you know, unless it would be like a darts movie or something like that. So it just happened to be rowing, and I'm so glad it was because rowing is truly an incredible thing.
Yeah, and talk about your training, because I was reading that you trained with Olympians or something.
We did, yeah. Terry O'Neill, he won the gold at Atlanta. as a coach, and he coached us. We trained for 2 months before we shot for 4 hours a day. We started in February. It was snowing the first day we went onto the water. It's just like, oh boy. And we were a professional sports team, you know. It was a truly remarkable experience, and I haven't rowed since. We had this. We'd done a lot of things, and we weren't very good, and by the end we were decent, and we achieved this target of 46 strokes per minute, which matched what the guys did in the final race in Berlin. And then we rowed in together, and we all realised that this was the last row. And we just took our time, and we took the rate down to probably like 12 or something, and just took our time and just enjoyed the moment. And it was a really special thing. We all did, but we had this bond that I think is unbreakable.
And your character actually had to learn how to be kind of a teammate. That was one of the themes that he went through.
Yeah.
Instead of, putting down his ego and his pride. Can you talk more about that?
Well, Joe was abandoned constantly by his family, Even from the age of 4, he was sent off across America to go live with his aunt. So he had issues. And being part of a team, you really have to, you're not an individual, you have to surrender to the boat. And the same with the relationship with Joyce. She teaches him how to trust, and he can take that into the boat, and he knows that he can rely on his friends.
Yeah, it was such a sweet moment, the train, and we don't want to give anything away, right? But what were those kind of moments that you hope that the audience get out that, feel good moments and inspiring moments that you guys loved being a part of?
I mean, I just feel like it's based on a true story, but it's so romantic at the same time, and it has a little pinch of magic and whimsy in it, but it's a true story, and that's why it's so cool to embody that. And I love that moment. It's kind of a throwback to kind of like old Hollywood moments.
We were joking that because they kissed different back then, so we joked that we did 5 months of kissing training for that too.
How does it feel when your book comes onto the big screen?
It's pretty exciting, I think.
Yeah.
And so many great writers write great books and actually don't get this opportunity. So I'm just really grateful for the fact that it happened, and I think it happened really well.
Well, I enjoyed it, but I started telling my family members that I was going to interview you and do the movie and everything, and they said they loved the book. They all had been like, we read the book, we love the book. So how is it, once you see it, on the big screen, does it just make the words come alive for you, or what's kind of the emotional experience you have?
Yeah, so I first saw it back in August at a screening, and I was very nervous because I didn't know exactly, I think all writers worry a lot the first time. But I was really happy with it right from the get-go. I was telling George Clooney, actually, about halfway through the movie, I heard my wife next to me starting to sniffle, and then by 3/4 of the way in the movie, I was sniffling, and so it really touched me. And anytime you do a book and then you're going to translate it to a completely different medium, it's a big leap because you got a 350-page book and you got to get it into 2 hours of runtime. So, but I thought they did that well, actually.
What were the elements that you really wanted them to hit, like the themes or.
Yeah, so that's I think what made me so happy was that really, I mean, it is an underdog at its heart. It's an underdog story. It's a story about resilience and perseverance. It's a story about trust and people learning to trust each other and learning to pull together. And it's a story of triumph, basically. And so I was hoping people would come out of the theaters pumped up by the races scenes, and just sort of with a glow in their heart. George has talked quite a bit, and I agree completely with him on this, is that he wanted to make sort of an old-fashioned feel-good kind of movie. It's pretty straightforward, but it's the kind of film a lot of us grew up with, and it's kind of film I think a lot of folks would like to see again, particularly these times. We're sort of all feeling pretty dark these days, and this is a film I think that lifts people up and makes them feel good about things.
That's exactly how I felt. I felt like, wow, this is not, this is different than a lot of the films being made right now. Yeah. It's very sweet, and it's kind of wholesome in a way, right?
Yeah.
And so I loved that element to it, where it's just, we could enjoy it, and it had really uplifting themes, and there wasn't anything you reminding of, of the tough times we live in today.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So is that something, you've written a lot of books, and so is that
Yeah.
something you think about when you're writing, that you want to bring kind of the heart of those time periods?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm fascinated by history, so I'm always, trying to immerse myself. For this book, I spent years immersing myself in the 1930s, because obviously I didn't grow up in the 1930s. But I enjoy writing books that sort of recreate a time and a place. And that's what I was striving for with the book. Again, I think that's something the film does well. I feel as if it's sinking you into the 1930s and that worldview. So that's a lot. That's a big part of the fun for me of writing a book like this. The other part is just sort of doing justice to the characters that you're writing about, because these are real people who really lived and they have real families. So I spent a lot of time when I was writing the book talking to family members, and they were very helpful. They came to me with letters and diaries and photographs and things like that. So you feel a responsibility when you're writing about real people, particularly real people who've passed away, to get it right, to do justice to their life stories. So for me, part of the pleasure, and I think this is probably true for the filmmakers too, is sort of just doing justice to who these guys were, what their families were like, the hardships they went through, the kind of triumph they experienced, just getting it right, basically.
I'm from a faith organization, and so I felt like the characters did have a lot of faith to get through, everything that they had to get through.
Right.
The main character, especially, because he was always working hard.
Yeah.
And so, could you kind of expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a glimpse back at a time when I think about my father, who came from the same era, worked extremely hard.
Yeah.
A lot of humility, he was very open to trusting other people. He wasn't cynical. So there were a lot of values that generation had that I think come through in this story and this film. And also in terms of faith, George, one of the characters in the book and in the movie to some extent is this guy, George Pocock, who actually built the boats they rode in. But he was a craftsman. And he was a huge inspiration to all of these boys on a sort of spiritual level. He had a kind of gentleness and kindness to him, but he talked. I remember there's a quote he gave several times. He said, "When you're rowing well, you're approaching perfection, and when you touch perfection, you're touching the divine." Oh. So for him, there was a sort of spiritual elevating part of doing whatever it is you do as well as you can possibly do it, because that raises you in a spiritual sense.
I love
so yeah, that has always stuck in my head.
I love that, and he was such a wonderful character because he was kind of a fatherly figure to the main character, and I loved that element. So thank you for talking about that.
Yeah, he was a big part of the story, actually. And when I started researching the book, Judy, Joe's daughter, kept talking about Pocock this, Pocock that. I didn't know who Pocock was, and then she said he was a boat builder. I said, okay, he built the boat. So what? Then I started actually talking to people about him, and he was this hugely influential character in the lives of all these 9 guys, but also actually generations of young men who rowed for the University of Washington, because he had this fatherly, sort of wise, sage-like way about him. He was full of a sort of fundamental human kind of wisdom. He influenced lots and lots and lots of young men, and it was only men that were rowing at Washington at that point, and they have a wonderful women's program now.
Well, another great theme is, they're the underdogs, right? And so they're coming from very little, and I love that theme of, like, you can make it if you work really hard, and kind of the spirit of that. So can you kind of...
Yeah, I mean, nobody could be more of an underdog than Joe Rance. I mean, of the 9 kids in the boat, they were all pretty poor, and it was the middle of the Depression, so they were all struggling. But Joe in particular, his family had abandoned him. He had pretty much raised himself, and he had lots of times when he couldn't get enough to eat as a teenager and growing up. So when he arrived at the University of Washington, he was this skinny, poor kid, and he had to get on the crew if you got on crew, the university would give him a part-time job, and that would pay his tuition through the rest of the term. So it was a kind of a battle for survival for a lot of these kids.
For your own self, when you're writing this, do you feel like you learn from the people that you're writing about, or personally, or maybe put a touch of personal things in it yourself on
Yeah, I mean, you do. I mean, I have to say, you study these kids and their lives and how they conducted themselves and all that they went through. And I also often think about my own dad, because he went through very similar experiences during the Great Depression. And it puts in context for you the kinds of things that you might be struggling with now. They had real problems, really big problems. Not that we don't sometimes too, but as a generation, they faced huge obstacles, starting with the beginning of the Depression, of course. And so it makes you, spending 4 years writing a book, getting to know these guys that closely, it definitely has an impact on your life as a writer and my relationship with my family and everything, absolutely. And all for the best, I think.
If you enjoy videos that follow your values like ours and you want to help us continue, go to movieguide.org/donate, because we're actually a nonprofit. You may not know that, but we're working in Hollywood every day to help families have more choices that follows their values. And also subscribe right now.